Welcome to HardScript.
Help me reach 5,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and leave your thoughts in the comments. The moment we walked into the party, she cut me down with a single sentence. Claire sat at the table, looked straight at me, and said loud enough for others to hear, "Don't stand here near me." The words hit like a slap, not just because of what she said, but because of how she wanted people to hear it. She didn't whisper. She didn't lean in privately. She announced it, like I was a burden she couldn't wait to distance herself from. I stood there frozen for a second, drink in my hand, eyes on her as the people nearby shifted uncomfortably. And then, from across the table, another woman spoke. She leaned forward with a half smile and said, "Sit there with me." Her tone wasn't mocking. It was casual, inviting, almost protective. She had seen what Claire had done, and she wasn't going to let me stand there like a fool. I walked over and sat down beside her. Her name was Rachel. I had met her once before through mutual friends, but never like this. She carried herself with quiet confidence, the kind that didn't need an audience. As soon as I sat, Claire stiffened. I saw it. The way her eyes darted, the way her posture shifted. She hadn't expected me to move. She thought I'd shrink back, pretend her words didn't cut, laugh it off for the sake of peace. But instead, I sat down next to someone who actually wanted me there. Rachel didn't make a scene. She asked me about my work, about things outside the shallow small talk of the party. She listened, really listened, like my words had weight. Meanwhile, Claire stood up suddenly, her chair scraping across the floor. She muttered something to the woman beside her and walked off toward the bar. I didn't follow. I didn't even look back. The music grew louder, laughter filled the air, but I felt something shift inside me. Claire thought she had the power that night, that she could humiliate me and I'd swallow it like always. But by telling me not to stand near her, she had handed me the first real freedom I'd felt in years. When Rachel laughed at something I said, it wasn't flirtatious. It was natural, easy, unforced. I realized then how long it had been since anyone reacted to me that way. Claire kept glancing back, her face tightening with every minute. The control she once held over me was slipping, and she knew it. I didn't plan what came next. I didn't need to. Sometimes the most powerful move is no move at all. And that night, my silence spoke louder than anything I could have said. Claire returned from the bar with a glass of wine in her hand, her smile tight, forced. She didn't look at me at first. She looked at Rachel. I could see the calculation in her eyes, the quick assessment of what had just shifted. She sat back down across the table, angled her chair away from us, and laughed too loudly at something someone else said. It was a performance, one she had perfected over the years, but this time it rang hollow. I stayed where I was, calm, collected, answering Rachel's questions, letting the conversation flow naturally. It wasn't about attraction. It wasn't about making Claire jealous. It was about the fact that for the first time in a long time, I wasn't begging to be included. I was simply being. And that unsettled her more than any confrontation could have. When Rachel excused herself to grab a drink, the silence between Claire and me was heavy. She finally spoke, her voice low, sharp enough for me to hear, but quiet enough to mask it from the others. She asked if I was seriously going to sit there all night, if I was trying to make her look bad. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even turn my head fully toward her. I just said, "I'm exactly where I was invited." Then I picked up my glass and took a slow sip. Her face hardened. She stood again, walked toward a group on the other side of the room, and tried to lose herself in their laughter. But every few minutes, I felt her eyes on me, checking if I was watching. I wasn't. Rachel came back, and the conversation picked up where it left off. It wasn't flirtation, it was recognition. She saw what Claire had done and stepped in, not for herself, but because she had witnessed enough to know I didn't deserve to stand there humiliated. That quiet act of respect did more for me than years of my wife's indifference ever had. By the end of the night, Claire's performance was unraveling. Her laugh was too sharp, her words too forced, her gestures too big. She wasn't in control anymore, and she knew it. When we left, I walked out first, calm, steady, without waiting for her. She caught up quickly, hissing under her breath that I had embarrassed her. I didn't answer. I unlocked the car, got in, and drove. The silence on that drive home was the sharpest cut of all. For once, I wasn't the one left bleeding. She was. And she felt it. The drive home was long, but I didn't fill it with words. I kept my eyes on the road, steady, calm, while Claire shifted beside me, restless, waiting for me to explode or beg for an explanation. That was the rhythm of our marriage, her cruelty followed by my attempts to smooth it over. But tonight was different. Tonight, I gave her nothing. When we pulled into the driveway, she stayed in the car a moment longer, her hand frozen on the door handle. She finally broke the silence, accusing me of disrespecting her in front of everyone. She said I had embarrassed her by sitting with Rachel, that I had undermined her as a wife. I turned to her slowly, my voice measured, and told her, "You embarrassed yourself the moment you told me not to stand near you." Then I stepped out, leaving her sitting in the dark car, stunned. Inside, I poured a glass of water and sat at the kitchen table. Claire came in a few minutes later, her tone softer now, almost trembling. She said she didn't mean it the way it sounded, that she had just wanted space, that I was overreacting. I listened, expressionless, until she was done. Then I stood, rinsed my glass, and went upstairs without a word. My silence was louder than any fight. The next morning, she tried to reset everything. She made breakfast, set the table, even dressed like it was a special day. But the cracks were showing. Her hands shook as she poured the coffee, her eyes flicking to me, searching for some sign of forgiveness. I gave her nothing. I ate quietly, thanked her once, and left for work. At the office, I couldn't stop replaying the moment Rachel told me to sit beside her. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't about her. It was about the contrast. One woman treated me like I was disposable, while another, someone barely in my life, treated me with more respect in 5 minutes than my wife had in years. That realization was heavy, but it wasn't painful. It was clarifying. When I came home that night, Claire was waiting. She tried to smile, but it faltered quickly. She asked if we could talk. I told her there was nothing to talk about. Her eyes widened, panic flickering across her face. She wasn't used to me refusing her stage. And in that moment, she finally began to see what I had already accepted. The man she thought she could push aside was gone, and I wasn't coming back. By the end of that week, Claire's demeanor had shifted completely. She wasn't the bold, dismissive woman who used to cut me down with a single glance. She was quieter now, her movements smaller, her words uncertain. Every time I walked into a room, she seemed to flinch, like she wasn't sure which version of me she was going to face. But the truth was simple. I wasn't a version anymore. I was steady, cold, resolved. One night, we attended another gathering, this time at a friend's house. Claire clung to me from the moment we walked in, introducing me to people she had never bothered to before, laughing too loudly at my jokes, holding onto my arm like we were newlyweds. To everyone else, it probably looked like a loving couple, but I knew it was desperation. She was performing, trying to reclaim ground she had already lost. Across the room, I caught Rachel's eye. She gave me a polite nod, nothing more. But that tiny gesture cut through the noise like glass. Claire noticed it too. Her grip on my arm tightened, and she whispered under her breath, warning me not to embarrass her again. I didn't answer. I simply excused myself, walked to the patio, and let the night air clear my head. Claire followed minutes later, her smile gone, her voice sharp. She asked why I kept ignoring her, why I was making her look like a fool. I turned to her, my expression calm, and said, "You managed that on your own." Her face twisted, caught between rage and fear. She wanted me to fight, to raise my voice, to give her something to push against. But I stayed still, giving her nothing. The rest of the night, she hovered, restless, unsettled. Every laugh I shared, every conversation I had that didn't include her only deepened her unease. She tried to pull me back in, but I kept my distance, calm, polite, unreachable. When we got home, she finally cracked. She asked if I wanted a divorce, her voice trembling like she already knew the answer. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I just looked at her for a long moment and said, "You'll know soon enough." Then I walked upstairs, leaving her standing in the kitchen, gripping the counter as if it were the only thing keeping her from collapsing. That night, for the first time, I realized the power of silence. I didn't need to argue. I didn't need to explain. She was already destroying herself with the weight of what she feared most. And I was just watching. By the 5th week after that party, Claire's control was slipping through her fingers. The woman who once brushed me aside without hesitation now hovered at the edges of my silence, desperate for scraps of attention. She cooked meals she never bothered with before, dressed as though every night was a date night. and forced conversations that died the moment I gave one-word answers. The harder she tried, the colder I became. One evening, I came home late from work. She was waiting in the living room, candles lit, wine poured, dressed like she was trying to rewind the years. She told me she thought we could talk, maybe reconnect. I looked at the table she had set, then at her, and said only, "I'm not hungry." I walked past her, leaving the wine untouched, the candles flickering in a room that felt emptier than ever. That night, I slept in the guest room again. Around midnight, I heard soft footsteps, the creak of the door. She stood in the doorway for a long time, whispering my name, asking if I could at least talk to her. I didn't answer. I lay there in the dark, steady, silent. Eventually, the door clicked shut, and I heard her crying down the hall. The next morning, she acted like nothing happened. She greeted me with forced cheer, asked how I slept, asked if I wanted pancakes. I told her I already ate at the office. Her smile cracked, her hands trembling as she set the pan back on the stove. Later that week, Rachel called. It wasn't about that night. It was about work, a project we had both been involved with months earlier. Still, hearing her voice reminded me of the contrast I couldn't ignore. Respect versus humiliation. Warmth versus indifference. One sentence at a party had drawn the line between them, and Claire was now standing on the wrong side of it. On Friday evening, Claire finally broke. She confronted me in the kitchen, eyes swollen, voice raw. She asked if I was seeing someone else, if that was why I had pulled away. I shook my head and said, "I don't need someone else to leave you. You've already given me every reason." She froze, her breath catching, and for the first time I saw real fear in her face. Not anger, not arrogance, fear. She realized then what I had known for weeks. I wasn't waiting for her to fix this. I was preparing to leave, and that knowledge hit her harder than any betrayal ever could. By the 6th week, Claire's fear had turned into obsession. She shadowed me around the house, asking questions I didn't bother to answer, offering things I didn't ask for, hovering like proximity alone could erase years of neglect. But her closeness didn't reach me anymore. It only pushed me further into silence. One evening, I walked in from work to find the dining table set again. Candles, food, wine. She was waiting, nervous, wringing her hands like a teenager on her first date. She told me she had cooked my favorite meal, that she wanted us to sit down and talk like we used to. I looked at the table, then at her, and said simply, "I already ate." I walked past her, heading upstairs, and the sound of her breath breaking behind me told me everything I needed to know. That night, I stayed awake in the guest room, scrolling through my phone in the dark. Around midnight, the door creaked open again. She stepped inside, her voice barely audible as she said she missed me, that she couldn't stand this distance, that she didn't know how much longer she could take it. I didn't respond. I didn't even look at her. She waited, hoping for something, anything, before leaving in silence. The next morning, she was pale, drained, her eyes swollen. She tried to act normal in front of the kids, but the facade was cracking. They sensed it too. They stayed close to me, asking me questions, laughing at my jokes, while Claire sat at the end of the table, isolated in her own house. That afternoon, Rachel texted me about another work detail, nothing personal, nothing intimate. But seeing her name on my phone made me think of the moment she told me to sit with her. That moment was still echoing, a reminder of how little it takes to show respect, and how devastating it is when the person you trust refuses to give it. By Friday, Claire confronted me again. Her voice was raw, desperate, shaking as she asked if I was planning to leave her. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I simply told her, "You'll know when it happens." Then I picked up my keys and left for the gym. She didn't scream. She didn't chase me. She just stood there, her face white as chalk, her body trembling. She knew I wasn't bluffing. She knew I wasn't playing games. And in that silence, she finally realized. Her worst fear wasn't that I might leave someday. It was that I already had. By the 7th week, Claire was unraveling. She barely tried to hide it anymore. Her eyes were hollow, her movements frantic, as though she was searching for a way back to a door that no longer existed. She hovered around me like a shadow, waiting for me to acknowledge her, but I stayed steady, calm, untouchable. One night, she finally broke completely. She stood in the doorway of the guest room, her voice trembling as she said she was sorry. Sorry for the way she had treated me. Sorry for humiliating me at the party. Sorry for all the times she had brushed me aside. She begged me to tell her we could fix things, that it wasn't too late. I looked at her for a long moment, my face expressionless, before saying, "It's not about being sorry. It's about respect." And that's gone. Then I turned back to my phone, leaving her standing there in silence. She collapsed against the doorframe, sobbing quietly, before finally retreating down the hall. The next morning, she tried to mask it again. She put on makeup, dressed as if she were going out, and asked if I wanted to join her for lunch. I told her I had other plans. I didn't explain. I didn't soften it. I left her standing in the doorway with a smile frozen on her face, watching me walk away. That afternoon, I met Rachel briefly for a coffee. It wasn't a date. It wasn't romantic. It was two people talking about work, about life, about anything but the chaos I was living in at home. But the ease of it, the respect in her tone, reminded me again of the gap I could never bridge with Claire. When I returned home, Claire was waiting, tense, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. She asked where I had been, who I was with. Her voice cracked on every word. I didn't raise mine. I simply said out. She pressed harder, demanded details, but I gave her nothing. I walked upstairs, calm, leaving her drowning in her own questions. That night, I heard her pacing the hallway outside my room, whispering to herself, crying quietly. But I didn't move. I stayed in bed, steady, detached, letting her face the silence she had once forced on me. And in that silence, the balance of power shifted completely. She wasn't the one dismissing me anymore. She was the one begging not to be dismissed. And I had already made my choice. By the 8th week, Claire was no longer hiding her panic. She had stopped pretending everything was normal. Her words came out in fragments. Her gestures were clumsy, and she looked at me like a woman watching her world burn while holding a glass of water too small to stop it. One night, she set the table for two again, but this time there were no candles, no wine, no performance. Just a simple dinner. She sat down across from me, her hands shaking as she asked if I was leaving her. Her voice cracked, fragile, like she was afraid of the silence that might follow. I didn't answer right away. I let the question hang between us. Finally, I said, "You'll know soon." And I went back to eating. Her fork slipped from her hand, clattering against the plate, and she stared at me with wide, wet eyes. Later that night, I overheard her on the phone again. She whispered to someone, her mother, maybe a friend, that she thought she had lost me, that she didn't know how to fix it. I stood in the hallway, listening to her crumble in real time. For years, I had been the one on the phone, the one begging for advice, asking how to reach a woman who had shut me out. Now it was her turn, and no one could give her the answer. The next morning, she followed me around the house. She asked where I was going, when I'd be back, if I wanted her to come along. I told her nothing, just picked up my bag and left. Her voice cracked as she asked if I hated her. I didn't respond. I closed the door behind me, letting her drown in the silence she had once weaponized against me. That afternoon, I met with my lawyer. The papers were ready. All I had to do was sign. I held the pen in my hand for a long time, staring at the lines, thinking of everything that had led me here. The begging, the humiliation, the rejection. And then I signed, steady, deliberate, final. When I came home that evening, Claire was waiting in the living room. Her eyes were swollen, her face pale. She asked if we could start over, if we could forget everything. I placed the envelope on the table and said, "We already ended a long time ago. This just makes it official." Her knees buckled, and she sank into the chair, covering her face with her hands. I walked upstairs without looking back. For the first time, the silence wasn't mine to carry. It was hers, and it was deafening. The papers sat on the table all night, untouched. Claire didn't move them. She didn't even look at them. She sat there for hours, her hands gripping the edge of the chair, her breathing uneven. I went upstairs, slept soundly, and when I came down in the morning, she was still in the same spot, her eyes red, her body slumped like she hadn't slept at all. She tried one last time. She followed me into the kitchen, her voice breaking as she said she would change, that she would do anything. She swore she would never push me away again, that she would fight for us if I gave her the chance. I opened the fridge, poured myself a glass of water, and said calmly, "The fight should have happened years ago." Then I walked past her. She reached for my arm, but I pulled away, not harshly, just firmly, leaving no space for doubt. That evening, I packed a bag. I didn't announce it. I didn't give a speech. I folded my clothes, took the essentials, and placed the bag by the door. Claire came in as I zipped it shut. Her face went white, her lips trembling as she asked if I was leaving. I met her eyes for the first time in days and said, "I already have. This is just the last step." She broke then. Her knees buckled, and she slid to the floor, sobbing, begging, clutching at the hem of my shirt. But I didn't bend down. I didn't comfort her. I let her cry, her voice echoing in the house that once carried only my silence. I carried the bag out, set it in the trunk, and turned back just once. She was standing in the doorway now, tears streaming, her body shaking. I raised my hand, not in anger, not in farewell, but in the smallest gesture of finality. Then I got into the car and drove away. The city lights blurred as I drove, but my mind was sharp, steady. For years, I had begged for scraps of attention, begged for respect, begged to matter. And in the end, I had found strength not in words, not in rage, but in silence. When I reached my new apartment, I set the bag down and looked out at the skyline. The air felt different, lighter, sharper. It wasn't just freedom. It was clarity. Claire was still trapped in the echo of her choices. But I was gone, and I wasn't coming back. The first morning in my new apartment was quiet in a way that didn't feel empty. The hum of the city outside the window, the faint clatter of pipes in the walls, ordinary sounds, but they felt like freedom. No tension in the kitchen, no eyes following me around the house, no forced conversations. Just silence, and for once, it was mine. Claire called. I let it ring. Then she texted, long messages filled with apologies, promises, desperate attempts to rewrite years in a few paragraphs. I read them once and deleted them. She had spent too long teaching me that my needs didn't matter. Now, her words meant nothing. At work, people noticed the change. I wasn't dragging myself through the day anymore. My voice was steadier, my focus sharper. Even Rachel, who knew more than most, said I seemed different, lighter, stronger. I didn't explain. I didn't need to. The transformation spoke for itself. Weeks passed, and the silence between Claire and me became permanent. Papers were signed, lawyers handled the rest. She sent messages through mutual friends, asking if I would reconsider, if I would at least meet to talk. I didn't. I had no interest in reopening wounds I had already closed. One evening, I went out with colleagues. The music was loud, the drinks steady, and for the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about who was watching me, who was waiting to cut me down. I laughed easily, spoke freely, felt present in a way I hadn't in a long time. Across the room, a woman caught my eye. Not Rachel, not anyone I knew, just someone who smiled without expectation. I smiled back, not because I needed her, but because I finally remembered I could. At night, back in my apartment, I looked at the city lights and thought of everything that had happened. Claire had tried to humiliate me, dismiss me, break me down piece by piece. But all she had done was give me the push I needed to step away. I didn't leave with anger. I didn't leave with revenge. I left with silence. A silence sharper than any words, stronger than any fight. And that silence is what she lives with now. Every choice she made echoes back at her, louder than my voice ever could. As for me, I'm not looking back. I'm not carrying the weight anymore. I'm not begging. I'm not explaining. I didn't disappear. I simply stopped standing near her. And that was enough. Support the channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing. I promise even more interesting stories.